Mitt navn er Ann-Karin Iversen. Jeg jobber i KS Buskerud, Vestfold og Telemark med oppvekst, utdanning og barnevern. Og vi har her i studio, det vil si på vårt KS-kontor, så er vi så heldige å ha Dr. Beverley Freedman fra Ontario for å fortelle oss hvordan Ontario har lykkes med å introdusere og forbedre bruk av teknologi i undervisningen der borte. Så vi gleder oss til å lære mer av Beverley.
Hi, I'm Bev Freedman, and Ann-Karin and I are going to have a conversation, first about technology and then about kindergarten. I have been in education for a long time, began in 1972 as a teacher. So I've been a teacher, upper secondary primarily, an administrator. I've worked in our Department of Education, our Ministry of Education. I've been a supervisor of principals and a supervisor of supervisors of principals, and now I work at the university.
Dear Beverley, why is it so important for us to pay attention to the effective use of technology in schools?
And this is something as educators we've been thinking a lot about. The world has shifted. We are now in an increasingly digitally connected, globally linked age. There are 1.3 billion active users on Facebook, including me. And if Facebook was a nation, it would be second only to the People's Republic. Every day, 5.9 billion searches on Google. There are 10 billion internet devices around the world. In 1984, there were only 1,000. So that if the possibilities and opportunities available through technology, the internet, social media, and digital content have expanded, how can and must teaching and learning alter, frame, and reframe to meet these new challenges? Today, it's estimated 65% of students from grades 1 to grade 8 will be in jobs that haven't even been invented. And so, as educators, this is what we're thinking about. What does it take to have learning in an increasingly digital age? Students will need to have opportunities, support to think critically, work collaboratively, and communicate clearly and effectively to provide evidence of their learning. Digital tools have transformed the way that students learn. It allows them to be connected, not only just to students in their school, in their community, but now globally across the world. Students can access information. Critical thinking enables them to distinguish between relevant, credible information and all of the myriad of content that's available to them on the web. Digital learning can be a provocation, disruptive with the possibilities of causing teachers and students to explore their learning differently. Digital learning has altered the knowing divide in classrooms. The ability for students to access the internet has leveled the playing field. We are now learners together. Digital tools allow students to capture evidence of their learning and give it a new take, a new voice, and a new context. Also, as a caution, in a digitally connected age, students can roam the internet. What students publish and post remains forever. There are predators on the internet. We live in possibly dangerous worlds. We need to teach both digital literacy, what is relevant, factual, reliable, and digital citizenship, the norms for safe and acceptable use on the internet. A matter of fact, a recent statistic is that in the United States, 35% of all couples have met on the internet. So the internet opens up all sorts of possibilities.
What has Ontario done on the pedagogical use of technology in schools?
So like Norway, like most countries, you start off investing in hardware and infrastructure. And from my visits to schools, Norway has done a better job. Their schools are more intelligently designed and resourced. Like Norway, you develop curriculum and supporting resource materials for critical thinking and safe use. We develop protocols and policies. We support what we call the 6 C's in Ontario: character education, citizenship, communication, critical thinking and problem solving, collaboration, creativity, and imagination. These are all the 21st thinking skills that students will need to exist in this digitally connected age. We develop resources and support for teachers to explore more effective uses of technologies. And this presentation will include some links that you as the viewer can choose to explore digitally. And we also now allow students to specialize in technology. We've created pathways to apprenticeship, the world of work, college and universities, and technology is one of those ways that students can choose what their future will look like.
Why have you been doing it?
Well, we talked about the fact that we're digitally connected and globally linked. And so as we've begun to explore how do we actually make this happen in Ontario schools and classrooms, we recognize that we've become more mobile. We started with desktops, we moved to laptops, we're looking at tablets, and now we'll be moving into phablets. Phablets are the large phones that will have the possibilities that we all can use. Some schools have students bring their own devices rather than having the schools prepare. In terms of equity, because equity is always a concern for us, we recognize not all students have equal access. So we make sure that the technology is accessible for students who need it, either for special needs, for it to be accessible, or for students for whom the technology is not economically accessible. We make sure that we have laptop programs for those students to use. We're working on integrating technology, embedding it in the curriculum as part of digital learning for the 21st century. We're experimenting with blended learning in terms of students will go to the internet, places like the Khan Academy or other sources, learn about, and then come to school and with their teachers share and go deeper in the learning. We're working on building social networks. Most of our administrators now have blogs. They are on Twitter. Our Premier, our Minister of Education are doing the same. We're developing and using apps to enhance the learning. And we're beginning to explore gamified learning. There is a lot of research around why gamified learning supports what we know best about feedback and motivation and engagement.
Beverley, what has been the results?
Well, so we look at the results from two ways. We look at the results from what we saw raising the bar, maintaining excellence in education, and we look at the results from an equity lens. So in terms of equity and access, what we want to do is to make this technology and possibilities available to as many students as possible. We know that from our own research, 85% of all Ontario students, whether or not they're from families of wealth and privilege or families of low socioeconomic status, 85% of them have access to the internet at home. And we also know that internet access is not being used, for the most part, in Ontario schools on a regular basis for homework or home-to-school work. So we're beginning to unpack the reasons for this and trying to embed more technology and digital learning in the schools. We're exploring tablets and handheld devices, 3D printers. I've talked briefly about gamified learning. We're using the technology for simulations. We used to do dissections with rabbits, and now we can do it all digitally, and students have the ability to learn so much because we can bring in the top researchers, the top doctors, the top mathematicians in the world and bring them into our classroom to share. We have more mentorships and co-ops for students to explore what their possibilities and futures are, and they can have conversations not only with businesses and organizations in their own community, but in fact the world is now available to them. Students who traditionally couldn't afford to visit museums or sites around the world, we now have that available. For students for whom accessibility was an issue, mobility issues, vision issues, hearing issues, we now can open up the world to them as well. And thanks to Commander Chris Hadfield on the International Space Station, Canadian students were in touch with him, could ask him questions, they sang with him, and their whole idea of possibilities from the space station to their school and back had opened up. We look at the data very carefully. So not only are we concerned with performing well, but who isn't? And we talk about closing gaps. And so we take our data, our evidence, and we slice it. We slice it by things like gender. We know that young women and young men approach digital content differently. For young women, it's much more heavily focused on social media. And we know that our young men underperform provincially, nationally, internationally in reading and writing, as do Norwegian students, in fact, as do males across the world. So how can we look at getting them to be interested in reading and become critical readers and thinkers by accessing content differently? Our English language learners, our immigrants to Canada, refugees to Canada, we're using digital content so we can create books that are Farsi and English side by side, that we can take advantage of the research in multiliteracies that people like Jim Cummings and Elizabeth Coelho have been pioneering at the University of Toronto. For students with special needs, digital content technology is altering their world, not only through voice to text, text to voice, but in terms of having, for students with mobility issues, accessing different types of technologies. And so the world is shifting for them too, and it's become an enabler of education. We now can say what stands between the student and the learning. For me, it was glasses, and now we can provide the equivalent of glasses through digital content and through technology. Teachers, administrators, we're learning together. We are not digital citizens, we are digital immigrants. And so we are now exploring the world differently. My granddaughter, who is 4, is doing an experiment around pumpkins and collecting the information digitally and looking at it in graphing in ways that would not be possible for 4-year-olds in a previous world. And we're looking at the international assessments, the results and analysis of PISA. For us, the Education Quality and Accountability Office, our provincial assessments, the Pan-Canadian assessment, and the last and most topical is the International Computer and Information Literacy Study that was done in 2013, examining 60,000 13.5-year-olds, 8th graders, in competencies in computer and information literacy, looking across 3,300 schools in 20 countries, including Canada and Norway. And when we look at the data, both Norway and Canada scored well. Ontario and Canada scored among the top performing nations. Not only were the students able to demonstrate literacy, that is, understanding the test and the task and being able to respond, but digital literacy. So understanding the problem in the text, searching the internet for appropriate supporting materials. They look to see, as they analyze the results, how many websites did you visit? How many of those websites were relevant websites? Did students understand how to use and control their search engine? How did they select evidence? What evidence did they decide was effective evidence? And then how did they communicate all of that strategically? So together, globally, we're learning from one another. In Ontario, we're looking at the data. We're looking at our students' unique needs and abilities. We're building on the work of others, and we're recognizing that the reality of a globally connected digital age is the reality of learning. Thank you.